This video is sponsored by you and your generous support on Patreon. Patreon is the thing that keeps my work on this channel sustainable and allows me to try weirder, riskier video ideas like this. So if you like my videos and want to directly help the channel continue into the new year so I can keep making more, head to patreon.com/writingongames and pledge only what you're comfortable with. Thank you so much for your support, and now on with the show. Today I want to tell you a bit of a weird, winding tale. It's something of a departure for the channel for sure, but I hope you'll bear with me on it, because to me it's really interesting, and hopefully might open your eyes to a side of games and art you may not have considered before. I want to tell you about a musical performance that, since I've watched it, I've never truly been able to get out of my head. One that in recent times I've come to think about through the lens of game design, and what it means to create not just a music game in the traditional sense, but a game out of performing music. How such a concept brings into stark focus all of these minute ways in which we interact with each other that we might otherwise ignore in order to keep both performer and audience on their toes. How witnessing the end product can be as nail-bitingly tense as watching your favourite sports team in the tournament-winning game, and finally, how a few musicians whacking on pieces of wood for a few minutes managed to become the scariest musical performance I've ever seen. And I want to start by revealing to you how all this came about from a particularly unlikely, particularly daft source. A very old YouTube video I saw many moons ago of one of my favourite drummers, Bennink, performing solo in a museum on drum kits made of cheese. I've watched this weird thing dozens of times over the years. Here's a dude freeform tapping on cheese, shouting the brands of cheese, the word cheese. Art gallery attendees occasionally giggle, but otherwise it's quiet. On the surface, it seems kind of awkward. He is thwacking the hell out of this cheese, but there's so little noticeable difference in timbre between the snare cheese and tom cheeses that it's a wonder why this was even set up like it was. Even with the array of microphones orbiting and amplifying the two kits, it seems as if, bearing in mind that admittedly I'm judging by the audio quality of a 14-year-old YouTube video here, that any chatter from the audience would probably drown out the performance. There just isn't that much variance in sound to be produced here. The quote drumheads in question simply aren't resonant enough. And yet, for reasons I hope to convince you of as we go, my journey with this performance over the years has gone from not quite getting it to absolutely adoring it. See, in all the years I've been aware of this show, I've never really dug into the context. Entitled Cheese Kit Diptych, say that 5 times fast. Apparently, it was part of a 2005 drum exhibition and concert series curated for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto, with the cheese kits in question, one made of actual cheese, the other comprised of plastic containers as found in shop windows for example, being commissioned specifically for this drummer by artist, curator and fellow Dutchman to Bennink, Walter Willems. Solid info on this already obscure event is pretty scarce some 16 years after the fact. I don't know though, I kind of enjoy not knowing the full picture here, being left to question myself the circumstances that led to one of the most aggressive improvisers of his generation suddenly popping up in a YouTube thumbnail behind a wall of metal and Gouda, or why that daft concept does so much for me now. But wait a minute, who is this Bennink guy, and why is his role in this whole endeavour so important? Well, for some background, I became aware of the cheese kits just a few years after having my mind forcibly pried open by a little album entitled Machine Gun. This frenzied thrashing of sound is an example of free jazz, or free improvisation, where musicians forgo compositional convention almost entirely in order that they can express themselves more fully, resulting in an end product that's often messy to say the least. But Machine Gun, performed by monster saxophonist Peter Brotzmann's octet and my first exposure to Bennink as a drummer, felt different. Where most of the other free jazz I was discovering around that period of my mid-teens still felt a little too rooted in that formal jazz restraint, bound to the academy as it were, or hard and fast rules regarding how things were meant to sound when recorded, this was truly fucking unhinged. Every sound clipping the mics to ear-piercing oblivion. It was punk. Machine Gun is an album whose utter ferocity influenced not only my taste in music, but art and life in general. It really was that powerful, invigorating. See, these people are fucking screaming through their instruments, exerting the force of an army into your eardrums. As soon as those dueling saxophones enter and the heavily distorted rattling snares of drummers Bennink and Sven-Åke Johansson begin butting heads with one another, you feel as if you're being torn apart by the old Vickers MG adorning the cover. The sounds of pitter-patter rifles in the background exchanging random fire. No clarity as to who is firing at who. And then, after around a minute and a half, entirely without warning, the bomb drops on the trenches below. Any questioning regarding the origin or target of this frantic back and forth becomes pointless. In the end, the chaos of conflict is meaningless and all is annihilated by the onslaught of sound. In other words, this is improvisation as onomatopoeic storytelling. With Brotzmann and crew existing in a post-war, then-current civil rights movement society in upheaval, Machine Gun reads as a fierce indictment of the various conflicts, corruptions, and inequalities that had continued to ravage different parts of the world around the time of its recording. These anguished screams, this physical battery upon snareskin and metal and ivory alike, these are the sounds of agony, of death, and that's not something that should make you feel comfortable. It should make you want to put a fucking hole in your wall and do something to alter humanity's troubling trajectory. It's an alarmingly coherent statement for music that so evokes absolute oblivion, and Bennink was right at the centre of that. To me, his colossal percussive bombardment was the backbone of this glorious squall, as he was on so many of Brotzmann's most seminal albums that arguably changed my life. And here he is, all these years later, tapping on cheese in an art gallery. And I admit, when I first saw this, it all felt a bit too gimmicky for my liking. Bennink had gone from someone who, in my eyes, used the drums as an extension of his seething fury to putting what appear to be visual gags before actual sound. What a sellout, man. But that's the thing, becoming more familiar with Bennink's work over the years, it was truly daft of me to think that anything had really changed here. His style has always played on the margins of outright absurdity, always exploring new types of sound made with mundane objects, with equal parts childlike joy and the intensity I've previously outlined. Bennink actively toys with place, things, people, with the seeming understanding that while you can definitely read into this music and find meaning, appreciate the very real musicianship and keen ear that goes into creating these chaotic soundscapes, on its face, and I swear I say this with the utmost love and respect, this music is kind of silly as shit, and Bennink is very much in on that joke. All of this to say that the absurdity of any given scenario doesn't preclude a Han Bennink performance from meaning, substance, and musicality. Quite the opposite. And it's with that in mind that over the years I've come to appreciate this performance in a wholly different way. It's tense, it's intense. It's grown every bit as sonically interesting to me as his prior work, to the point that I no longer view it as a visual gimmick of any kind. Hell, I barely even think about the cheese when I watch it now. What I see instead is a musical game that has been set up for Bennink. One without a traditional win condition or goal necessarily, but one in which he is rather deviously positioned as his own worst enemy. A game that he has to fight desperately at every moment in order to win against himself. It's a musical tightrope walk, every single hit representing a moment-to-moment battle between force and delicacy. Things could very much fall apart at any moment, and he has no one to hide behind if that happens. All the eyes of a weirded out, physically uncomfortable crowd would be squarely on Bennink. But if he wins, so to speak, if he can keep things just teetering on the edge of control, navigating the unique challenges inherent to these drum kits in this unconventional setting, he will be able to take the audience wherever he wants to go. The challenge is as follows. As Bennink's sweat and anguished face attest to, in order to make the slightest audible noise on these relatively dead drums among this large crowd of people, he must hammer on this cheese in a way that would doubtless see him obliterate traditional drum heads. But beyond the sheer sustained force that this man, who I should add was in his mid-60s at the time of this performance, has to project onto this kit, further complication arises in the form of the symbols that surround him. Look, I don't know if any of you have ever been been stood right next to a massive cymbal being smashed, but it's far from what I would call a pleasant oral experience even in optimal conditions. And in this austere, quiet, but nonetheless acoustically cavernous gallery setting, the multiple cymbals around Bennink will inevitably bellow out with the slightest graze, the harshness of the high end uncomfortably reverberating around the crowd and, well, drowning out the cheese. These kits then suddenly become like a board game. He's been provided actual obstacles and positioned himself as a glass cannon of sorts. He must work harder, flail his arms more in order to amplify these less resonant drum heads. I mean, he really needs to go for it, which in turn will make avoiding an accidental, dynamic, shattering cymbal crash that much harder. Each grazed hi-hat or ride cymbal acting as a warning of how close he is to losing control, of actually alienating his audience due to physical discomfort. You know, he doesn't want people angrily covering their ears. He wants them listening. To bring it back around to something you might be more familiar with, to me it's the same kind of tension you'd find in a video game if you came up against a super difficult stealth encounter alongside a stringent time limit. Each side of that gameplay coin requiring a style of play that actively contradicts the other. More concretely, you could compare it to the Resident Evil 2 remake of all things. That gut punch that comes from turning a corner and finding yourself trapped in a hallway, with both the pursuer Mr. X and the extremely dangerous lickers at the same time. Escaping the former's devastating punch requires fast, intense movement, but such a loud sprint will alert the blind lickers to your presence, whereupon they'll rip your throat out. To really torture this analogy, the lickers are what we might call the symbols surrounding Mr. X's cheese. But the thing is, Bennink is well aware of the dynamic balancing act he's been challenged with, the absurdity of the setting, and the silliness of the kits themselves. He willingly brushes just up against that shrill explosion of sound, jolting the crowd with a sudden loud cymbal choke every now and then. A reminder of how effortless it would be to create absolute deafening madness if he wasn't a total master of his craft, able to toy with the audience in exactly the way he chooses to. At one point, he jokingly breaks into a more standard groove on the second plastic kit, momentarily bulldozing through the tense atmosphere with the sharpness of his hi-hat, before joking again and returning to a far more deft approach to the cymbals around him. A lightning-fast, blink-and-you'll-miss-it crescendo with the hi-hat's pedal allows him to pinpoint the precise amount of force he can exert in order to keep a light pulse going, without overpowering the rest of the kit that he is conversely, simultaneously battering upon. And you can readily see how successful he is in this endeavour, of cutting right through the haughtiness or seriousness of the art gallery world and getting to the real tension of the scenario. See, outside of the occasional giggle here and there initially, for the vast majority of this performance, you could hear a pin drop. Trust me, even art gallery gigs are not normally this muted. There's always at least someone annoyingly chatting away, but not here. Bennink more than has these people on side. They're transfixed, which in turn allows him greater freedom to up the ante on them, moving from the completely dead real cheese to the slightly louder plastic heads, and then, once he has the audience firmly in his hand, he can whip out of his seat and move to the real drum kit lying just out of view, where he can finally explode in the typical Bennink fashion. I mean, on its own, the performance is just so immensely fun to watch and to listen to. You know, the intensity of Bennink's barrage is palpable, his unique swing undeniable, even in the context of angular improvisation, where the timbre is less machine gun and more typewriter. But perhaps even more interesting than that is that this show represents a real dynamic progression, one that tells a story of a fish seemingly out of their depth, only to gradually turn the tables on the unsuspecting sharks that surround him. Ultimately, the goal of this musical game is to establish and gradually develop a kind of power over the audience. While you might not want the crowd angrily covering their ears, like I say, there is still a desire to make sure they can't quite find their footing. You know, throughout this performance, there's a kind of eerie but also downright tantalizing feeling of never being sure what could possibly happen next. The people softly giggle when Bennink shoves the stick in his mouth or starts shouting out cheeses, but look at how quickly people run out of the way as as he takes his chair to the actual drum kit. This is a man possessed, with a musician so enthralled in the task at hand, one who has readily exemplified the ferocity with which he will attack any musical challenge in his way. Who's to say he's not going to simply chuck the chair into the crowd? I'm not saying he would, obviously, but he's created such a wide space of possibility by maintaining such precise control over a fucking cheese drum kit that the audience will absolutely go with him, even when he puts on clogs and drums on the floor like a kid. They are not going to say a thing to challenge this. Bennink has won the musical game. He's proven his skill to these people, and they are putty in his hand. And it's this idea of power, toying with the way power is established and structured between different sets of people, that arguably lies at the heart of how many composers work with this idea of designing music as a game to be played. As an example, while other experimental composers have dabbled with this style, none have quite gained the notoriety around said pieces like avant-garde saxophonist John Zorn, with perhaps his most famous game piece, Cobra. Now, this kind of composition is referred to as a game because it's music designed as a series of rules rather than notation, where the end product, as wildly silly as it often ends up sounding, is far less important than just allowing for the creation and resolving of tensions among the musicians themselves. What Zorn describes as creating a small society, giving that society power, and witnessing the resulting psychodrama, as he calls it, play out for all to see. Cobra is a delightful clashing of emotions, both positive and negative. Feelings of competition, jealousy, anxiety quickly become visible as players jostle and vie for the attention of the conductor, so that they may momentarily control the form and direction of the improvisation going forward, pointing out who they'd like to improvise with and in what capacity, and the conductor, or referee in this case, choosing to give them a chunk of time with which to do so. In a process Zorn describes as dangling a carrot in front of people and seeing who reaches out to grab it, Cobra forces the shy out of their shells, and the overconfident into the background, as the power they so desire is snatched away from them, or they're forced to improvise with people they had no intention of working with or fighting against. Various factions form between improvisers, and it can create as much light-hearted antagonism as it does camaraderie. As much as the music itself might be a weird, blocky mishmash of textures and genres, each performance of Cobra is exciting to watch in its own way, because it hits at something deeper than just how musically tight a group is. It actively yanks at the seams of the interpersonal relationships between the players. As much as prank videos have rendered this term somewhat loaded, it's a fascinating social experiment in exposing musicians' vulnerabilities, how music and performance can act as a vector for the best and ugliest qualities of humanity at large to be laid out in their barest form. It's worth noting that Cobra eschews the prior convention of Zorn naming his game pieces after actual sports, lacrosse, hockey, rugby, etc. And instead, Cobra takes its title from a war game. And it's fitting, considering that, according to the composer himself, it becomes a scary, frightening thing to see these people blossom and become the assholes that they really are. To round things out though, on the other side of the spectrum, we have a piece of music that, while not necessarily designed as a game per se, demands the musicians remain in such absolute lockstep with each other at every single second that it has become by far the most terrifying musical performance I've ever seen live. And what it consists of is several minutes of people thwacking on little bits of wood. One of the early pieces composed by minimalist juggernaut Steve Reich, known primarily for his simultaneously lush and modernistically stark orchestral work, music for pieces of wood instead sees musicians armed with claves of different pitches gradually building up beat by beat fragments of individual rhythmic patterns over a constant wooden pulse, and repeating them until everyone is in step. Then they move on to the next set of patterns to continue the process. This seems wildly simple, right? Well, I honestly cannot remember a musical performance that so had me reeling in my seat. I mean it, I was peeking through the fingers covering my eyes as if I was watching a horror movie, morbidly waiting for the one mistake where everything fell apart. Because while it may appear uncomplicated, hell, perhaps as silly as drumming on cheese, the level of precision required here is almost unparalleled. The way the individual shifting rhythms rhythms are structured has the musicians often entering on awkward offbeats and needing to repeat those offbeats for extended periods of time, a process which, when focusing on a central pulse that fast, as well as the other people clanging on wood around you, can be excruciatingly difficult. The way that conductor Michael Tilson Thomas described it to Reich himself, "I know when I have truly learned your pieces because they stop hurting." This music requires you to listen like you have never listened to music before. Like many of Reich's pieces, it is a process designed to cycle through extremely subtle changes from one point back around to that original point. And it's a process that must go off without a hitch, lest it collapse in its entirety. Because while you can get as lost in the cacophony of wailing saxophones and cascading drums as a musician contributing to that whirlwind of noise as you can a listener, when it comes to mere wood blocks in a vast concert hall, or a cheese drum kit in an art gallery that's otherwise silent, there really is nowhere to hide. No distortion to rely on when you lose the beat or can't think of what to do next. There is a terrifying purity to the pulse of this machine, one that if tainted in any way, if any musician messes up one beat, causes the whole thing to stop in its tracks. This is a challenge of remaining the most cohesive musical unit possible. Entirely removed of any ego, you are making yourself vulnerable in a way few other types of music allow for. If you mess up, it's all gone. It's entirely obvious that you caused it, and all eyes and ears are subsequently on you. And you can visibly see this tension in many performances of the piece, once that crescendo builds to the final thwack. A stunned silence among the musicians, some opening their eyes, timidly scoping the room, before allowing themselves to breathe a sigh of relief, as if to say, holy shit, we actually pulled that off. Despite its outward simplicity, in my eyes, there exists very little music out there that's as high stakes as this. You know, one thought that's really excited me since the start of the channel is this idea of applying the principles of games as a medium to other forms of art. Thinking about what that would look like, what it would entail. And what I've constantly found is that whether it be music or literature or whatever, those pieces you could look at and call games to some extent are almost always relegated to the absolute lunatic fringes of their respective fields, giving an audience control, something that's inherent to even the most mundane and rudimentary video games, turns books into experimental postmodern tomes. It completely messes with our idea of narrative truth by playing with our understanding of what a book even constitutes to begin with. Musical games become these terrifying, incoherent lashings of noise that seek to scrutinize all kinds of societal norms and structures of power. I guess I just love the fact that these are wildly lofty notions, ones regarded as incredibly highbrow by the larger culture, that just happen to arise from the same kinds of decisions that go into how you might dodge a big monster in the big bad zombie game. Don't ever let anyone tell you that games are not powerful or they're just toys or whatever. As the existence of Bennink hammering away on a cheese drum kit can attest to, there are few artistic endeavours in my eyes that have such potential to cut to the core of what makes humanity tick. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this was a bit of a curveball for the channel, but honestly, it's the most fun I've had writing a video in ages, and who knows, there may be other weird ideas like this in the future. I just want to let you know that I really do appreciate you all indulging me like this. Be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all the YouTube stuff, as well as check out my podcast and Twitch, links in the description. I'd also like to sincerely thank my patrons here, without whose support I genuinely would not be able to keep the channel going. I'll be putting out an update video soon, but right now your support is more crucial than you can possibly know. If you've enjoyed any of the videos I've put out and want to help the channel continue by supporting my work, you can directly help out as well as get things like access to completely ad-free video uploads, Q&As, and now exclusive video content by heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging only what you feel comfortable with. I am genuinely forever thankful for your support in whatever form it takes. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artem Vitsyuk, Shardfire, Spike Jones, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Winter, Tom Webster, David Björk, Lucas, Bryce Snyder, Dr. Motorcycle, Henry Mielek, The Nameless Guy, Leah Chinello, Nicholas Villeneuve, Ruth Knapman, Dana Sikauskis, Captain Knuspich, Max Cohen, Jordan Midler, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.